What is the ultimate fear buster?
It's a big faux pas. We don't talk about fear because we don't have any.
Those experiences.
That one force of the universe.
Those situations.
Love with a capital L.
I think there's a part of all of us that knows
those people.
We do have fear over certain things.
That evoke this feeling of fear.
Fear, in fact, serves a purpose. Hey there, welcome. This is Truth Be Told. I am Reverend Dan, and we are the Soul Evolution Collaborative. Tonight, we are talking about the ultimate fear buster. I have no idea what that is. Hopefully, by the end of the night, we'll have some sort of idea, and we'll all have some clarity on what is the actual ultimate fear buster. But I think tonight is going to be more about fear itself, talking about fear. What is fear? Why do we fear? What happens when we fear? Because there's such a nuance and a story to fear. It shows up in a lot of different ways. It shows up as the fear of fear itself. It shows up as being fearful of a lot of things in life. And it shows up in a way where, for a lot of us, we're told maybe we're not supposed to have fear. So we're going to jump into all of that, hopefully all of the aspects of fear, what's true about it, maybe what's not true about it, and what we can do with it. So thank you for being here. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told. The ultimate fear buster. That is the topic for the week. We are talking about fear, which I know is a big faux pas. We don't talk about fear because we don't have any, right? At least that is the message that we so often receive culturally or even maybe spiritually, within Science of Mind, within the New Thought community, that fear is something you do not admit to having. And yet, I think there's a part of all of us that knows we do have fear over certain things, that fear is actually something that is hardwired into our minds from a sense of self-preservation, to have fear over certain things, that fear, in fact, serves a purpose. And yet, there seems to be this stigma within the New Thought community, within the New Age world, within the New Thought world, that to have fear is somehow negating our faith. That you don't actually believe the things you say. You don't actually believe in oneness or wholeness if you admit to being fearful of something. And I understand that fear having fear would seem to mean that we recognize there's all good, but also we're afraid of this thing, and somehow that seems to separate. And yet in reality, the idea of separating fear from our faith is actually creating that sense of duality that I think we're trying to avoid by not admitting fear, right? By making fear this whole other thing, right? If we have faith and wholeness and love over here, and we're not willing to admit fear, we set it off to the side. Well, now we really have this sense of separation. There are certain things in this world that we have learned to be afraid of to protect ourselves. And you can literally see this process happen if you spend or have spent much time with toddlers. At some point or another, I think that we have all witnessed a toddler climbing up something that we know they're not supposed to be climbing up, something that is definitely not safe. They climb up to the top, and whether you're looking or not, they are going to jump off because they know that you're going to catch them. And so you go diving across the room to intercept this child from smashing down onto the floor. But there is absolutely no fear and no doubt in their minds. They have all of the trust in the world that they're going to jump off this thing and you're going to catch them because we always have. Or hopefully that's the version of that scene that you have witnessed that child is going to jump and somebody is there, somebody sees it last second, they're going to catch them. But you can tell in that child's mind they have never experienced a moment of fear in their life. This is fun because someone is going to catch them. And yet somewhere along the lines, we all learn some degree of healthy fear. I'll say healthy fear, right? Healthy fear around maybe not jumping off the top of the unsafe thing we have climbed up, because at some point in our lives, we're either now too big to be caught, or there's no one there, or we have this, all of a sudden, this voice in our heads that says, maybe we shouldn't do that. And that voice is really helpful and really important, because there are times in our lives where we need to question whether we are doing something that is in fact safe or not. And so this shows up in many, many ways, from things as simple as it's probably not safe to drive through the stop sign without stopping. And other places, if you are, let's say you're hiking and you get to the top of some mountain where you're going to stop and have lunch. Well, there is that voice that tells us at what point it is no longer safe to get closer to the edge of that mountain, right? We have this voice that protects us, and we learn this over time. And so we have to recognize that there is a healthy fear, which I think we can just call fear, right? That fear itself is not something for us to avoid, but what would be the perhaps unhealthy version of fear is this idea, this kind of Americanized ideal that we have to be big and strong and not afraid of anything. That if you're not tough enough to face whatever your fear is, then somehow you're not good enough, you're not valuable enough, you're not worthy. The list goes on. That we have this unhealthy version of fear that has kind of captivated our minds into believing that we actually shouldn't or can't show fear of anything. And so there is this rehabilitation around the idea of fear that I think needs to happen. And so I believe that we are constantly being invited to look at what our beliefs are, of course, as we say so often, and in this case, what is our belief about fear? And do we feel like we can express this healthy fear? Can we express fear without having this story of rugged individual, if you express fear, then you are a sheep kind of mentality? What is it that we are believing and holding on to about the idea of fear? Can we express the things that we are fearful of in a way that is helpful to us, but in a way that is healthy, in a way that moves us forward, in a way that invites us to go back inward and see that thing within us that is looking to grow?
I like it. A few things. I think there's a lot there. Like one of the things that I'm not sure how this relates to our overall theme, but thinking about like when you were talking about like the toddlers and like you're rushing to run and grab them, and it's something that I learned raising young ones is that we need to let them fall sometimes. Because otherwise, we're always catching them, and then at some point they're going to take a big risk when we're not there because they don't, understand. Like when the consequences are lower, if we're always protecting them from the low consequences, they're going to experience that when they get older. And then came like politics and how they sell us on fear to try to like push agendas and
Well, and then that has like spun into this, like come all the way full circle again, where like as a country we've bought into that so much. So what I've realized in all of this and kind of doing some of the editing and whatever of all these videos, right, this is like, oh, we have a fear of fear, right? And so that's what plays out, because it's not actually like there is something that exists like naturally within us, like that fear of doing things that would put us in harm's way, that we learn. Like there's that thing that's wired in us, and then there's what we learn about that, right? And so actually my version of the toddler story was one summer I was down at my cousin's, and we all went to like the town pool or whatever, and my cousin's toddler, who was probably 3 at the time, decided they were going to just jump into the deep end with all of us and just go swim. They didn't know how to swim, had no floaties on, and whoever was with them just happened to turn around for a split second, and I happened to see it and swam over and like picked them up out of the water or whatever, right? But it's like there was no question in that kid's mind that they were just going to jump in and go hang with us, right? But then like we learn this whole like we shouldn't be fearful. Like so that I'm sure that toddler in that moment learned something. I don't know what. I don't know that they even remember at this point, but psychologically they learned something about pools and water and whether they could swim or not. And so that has an impact, which is important. Like it's important that we recognize we have those events and those things that we've learned, like touching the hot stove is not a good idea. Getting too close to the fire, jumping into the water, jumping off a high, whatever, all the like physical danger stuff. And those things that keep us safe mentally from other people or events or circumstances or whatever. But I feel like there's this thing that we've picked up by and large in the States where it's like we're told to have this fear of fear. Like you shouldn't be afraid, which has turned into like we can't talk about fear. And it has, like the government pushes all this, whatever, like all these political agendas get pushed, but then we all accept whatever version we want to accept of that and then push that forward in some other way. And it's just really weird and twisted thing. And I'm like, why? How? Holy shit! How did this happen? How did we get? And I feel like it's not even like putting this video together. Just like took a while because there was so much to even process about. Like, where do you even start?
Well, and I think then we absorb this like in our spiritual communities where this idea of fear, like you said, that's what kind of struck me at the very beginning when you talked about how we don't talk about it, or we're conditioned to think if we are spiritual or if we're whatever, then we don't have fear. It's kind of along the same lines as what we talked about last week with forgiveness. It's like this is like it creates this formula for this the ideal spiritual path, and the formula is without fear.
Right. Yeah, so, like if you have fear, you're doing something wrong. Right.
And so I think that recognizing that fear, and I don't want to give too much away because I know we have a lot of other videos, but I think recognizing that fear is a tool to be used. I think there's a difference between using the fear as a tool and being controlled by fear. So I think that's different. The energies behind it. The energy behind it is the one, if we're using it as a tool, then we are empowered. So we're recognizing that we're having this experience of fear, but we also have the power and the ability in the situation. Whereas being like paralyzed by fear, it's very disempowering. So it's understanding that we can have fear and that's okay because yes, it is a normal part of a human experience. It's the normal part of our interaction with the world around us and with others. It's just hardwired. And so it's not the black and white. It's like either you have it or you don't. No, I mean, I think it's a healthy tool. It's a natural tool that we use to kind of guide our decisions, our beliefs, our behaviors. And so I think when we can look at it as a tool, I think then we can see it in a different way.
Yeah. And I just got to be honest. I'm just like in this like almost spiral of like realizing how fearful we are to have fear. Because I mean, like that's literally what you're just saying. Right. We are so paralyzed by it. Like we're so afraid of the idea of having something to be fearful of.
Yeah.
What? Why?
It just is some reprogramming. I think it's a natural sort of product, But I think that it becomes like a default. And so, as we know, we talk about it, we can create new defaults, right?
Yeah.
And by looking at things differently, I think that's what we're trying to do with this topic of fear and forgiveness and all the other topics we've been talking about.
Yeah, for sure. All right. More?
What's next? Let's do it. So, fear. Now, I know this is a hard topic, and believe me, it's been a hard topic to even kind of get my mind around about how I see how fear plays out in my own life, and what do I do with that? Now, as I've looked back and reflected on fear in respect to my own life and the circumstances and situations that I've encountered, I've noticed how fear kind of has this kind of controlling effect. And maybe you feel the same way too. Those experiences, those situations, those people that evoke this feeling of fear and discomfort are often the people and situations and circumstances that we try to avoid the most. And sometimes with good reason, but sometimes fear creates this paralyzing hold on our experience. At least it has for me. And so when talking about fear, what do we do with that? What do we do with those experiences? What do we do with that feeling? What do we do with that paralyzing experience with respect to those things that make us the most fearful? And so what I'm proposing, and I know that this can be a challenge, and believe me, even as I say it, I'm wondering, how can I do this in my own life? I wonder if we could, instead of looking at fear in those areas as something to be avoided, I wonder if we could look at fear rather than this thing that we should turn away from. But I wonder if we leaned in just a little bit to maybe those experiences, those situations, those things that evoke the most fear in us. And often this fear comes from, for me at least, this unknown, this not knowing, and that space in between experiences, that transition, that creates a lot of fear. I wonder, instead of avoiding those thoughts or situations or circumstances, if we could lean into them wherever it's safe to do so, with a sense and a space of curiosity. And yes, there is the word curiosity again, because I think that curiosity becomes this partner in this exploration of fear. When we look at these areas, look at these situations that evoke this feeling, this emotion, this response in us, we may be able to look deeper about what are the underlying thoughts and beliefs and old patterns and old experiences that we're projecting into this experience that influence that feeling of fear. So then fear becomes not something to be avoided, but it becomes like this neon sign that says, hey, look here, look at this area. Maybe this is something we need to take a closer look at. And so then fear becomes this kind of guiding force in our experience, not something to be avoided, but maybe something to listen to. And so I know this sounds hard, and believe me, even as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, wow, how can I actually do this in a brave way? And this is a brave opportunity for us to step into. Now, it takes some authenticity, it takes some vulnerability, and I know we've talked about this so much, but when we're able to exert those things into this experience, when we're able to lean into this feeling of fear and these underlying beliefs that are maybe impacting that, then it brings to the surface the truth. And we know that the truth is what balances out this fear. And so if my fear in a circumstance is that I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not blank enough, you fill in the blank. We all have our own blanks. When I'm able to look in this area where I'm fearful
and see those underlying beliefs, then I can then say, oh, this idea that I'm not good enough. And then I can bring the truth to that experience, which is that I am an individualized expression of that one thing that's going on, that one thing that is moving all things. And wow, doesn't that balance, doesn't that shed light to that old idea or belief of not being good enough or worthy? And this is just an example of how we can use fear as a tool. Maybe not something to be avoided, but something to be leaned into. Something to take a closer look at, something to be more curious about. And it's in this that we can become a fear buster and really sink into the essence of who we are, the essence of this reality, this essence of this thing that flows through us as us. And when we do that, we can step into these circumstances with the strength and the confidence of that which lives in, as, and through us.
Yeah, I love that idea of leaning into those moments of fear. And what I realized about that, listening to you talk about it, is that we can really kind of get into the different depths of fear. Like there's, that kind of initial depth that we talked about in the last segment of like things to physically be afraid of and how we deal with fear in the physical world. But then there's kind of this next depth that you've brought us to of kind of beginning to discern what things we have created in our experience that we are fearful of, or how fear creates things in our experience. And, based on patterns in our past, what things are we creating out of a fearful thought pattern? And that's a whole other, it almost feels like this whole other realm of fear.
It's like existential fear.
Yeah. And it is one certainly worth leaning into. I like that idea. It's a tool. Like it is the thing that points us back. It's like redirects us. It's like, oh, this is the thing to look at. You're afraid of this. Don't ignore it. Look at this thing.
Right.
It's like some sensor going off,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something to be said too, for like irrational fear. When we have like just
right,
an uncontrollable, like phobias are kind of somewhat of a good example, like how I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but there's like we get irrational fears compared to like the fear that's helpful and good for us. So some benefit us, some are that tool, and then others, how much do we worry about stuff that we're just hung up on something that is probably not going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And
like that person in your life that always considers themselves a klutz, and they're so fearful about being clumsy that they actually create situations in their life to be clumsy in. Like they're like, you can watch them creating the clumsy situations because they're trying to step so carefully to avoid doing the clumsy thing that they become awkward and then do this even worse clumsy whatever and break and drop and like I've seen that over. There's something there. I've seen that. I've witnessed that in my whole life. There's always been somebody.
I think I've been that somebody a time or two. But yeah, I mean, this fear that we're talking about is not, I think, when you think about like physical threats, I think more about being like cautious. So this difference between being cautious of our surroundings and our experiences, and then being like, for me, fear has this really deep existential feeling. And so when I think about, if I'm not like the walk in the woods in the middle of the night, cautiousness, sort of being aware, always looking around. That's how I kind of feel like. And there've been times in my life where I've kind of operated in that, just kind of scanning the perimeter all the time.
Right.
But like this fear is like, yeah, it becomes this paralyzing kind of weight sometimes. And like you said, Chris, often it can be based in, you said irrational, but for me, it's like based in these stories that we create. And so these stories that we've confabulated based on a grouping of experiences, and we lump them all together and we say it's been true in these experiences, so it's been true in this experience over here, and we begin to confabulate our experience because we have felt unworthy in this scenario, or fearful in this scenario, or whatever in this, and so everything kind of gets lumped together in this kind of, I guess what you said, Dan, is kind of like this mindset that we begin to operate from, this kind of default mode. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be cautious. I think that we also, we should be cautious. We should be mindful of boundaries, especially in situations that we need to protect ourselves, both physically and emotionally. And so it's not that we're supposed to enter in scenarios with wild abandon and with no regard for anything. But I think in this conversation, it is being mindful of the story that's coming up for us, and is that story impacting the way we move about the world, the way we see ourselves, the way we see each other. Yeah, that's kind of what comes up for me around this. When I think of fear, it's more this like limiting experience. It's not the fear of like being eaten by a shark when you go in the ocean, which I also have that fear, or the fear of crashing when you fly a plane. I also have that fear. Or when you fly in a plane, not actually fly a plane, because I would never do that. But yeah, it kind of, for me, it's that kind of that limiting experience, that I am not going to step out and do this new thing because I am fearful. And what is that about? That's usually about some belief about myself, or what I had absorbed from my environment in any given situation. So that's kind of the fear that I was kind of speaking from.
Yeah. What's coming up for me about that is there's this element of discernment in there. And if there is a situation that arises where there is something for us to discern about it, and if we approach it through this habit of fear-based thinking or whatever, then it's like we avoid that, and then it creates a fear about it without ever actually having looked at fully whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
But if we take the time to look at it and discern what there is to be true about it, then very often I think there's probably not anything to actually be afraid of. But what is fear but the stories we're making up about what the thing is, right? So I think most of us driving, I use this example before, but like, we don't have a fear. Like, we don't stop at the stop sign out of fear. It's out of safety. Like, it's smart to stop at a stop sign.
Yeah.
Because there's an expectation in place. Like, there's going to be cars coming opposite directions, But if we once didn't stop at a stop sign and then gotten into an accident, we would probably develop a fear of intersections and whether we're going to stop at the stop sign or not. You know what I mean? Like, that is kind of really interesting, because then we like the physical activity then often informs the mental activity, and then the mental activity then circles back and informs the experience. I mean, it's this whole
cycle.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I want to go back to what Reverend Ryan was saying about not stepping out and trying something big, and I want to use this opportunity to pull in Brene Brown and courage.
Who?
She's this social worker named Brene Brown, and
I think it's Brenny.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I think it is. Yeah, it's Brenny. Well, okay. So one, like the fear of failure, keeps us from trying that thing, which ultimately seals the deal. If you don't do it, you are guaranteed to fail because you didn't even try. So that fear of failure there. But then also, just that, the definition of courage is not lack of fear. It's having fear, but doing that thing anyway.
Oh.
Right. The levels, there's so many levels.
Layers.
Layers. And maybe it's a spectrum.
It is definitely a spectrum.
It isn't everything. I love it.
We are not done quite yet, but we wanted to take a moment to let you know a little bit about Soul Evolution Collaborative and how you can get involved in whatever way works best for you. So the Soul Evolution Collaborative is an innovative spiritual collaborative dedicated to intentional evolution and authenticity of the human soul. This is a safe place to belong and be seen. And so here are a few of the many ways that you can get involved with SEC. So Tuesday, obviously, if you're watching, you know about Truth Be Told. It's our 7 p.m. Eastern time program, which is what you're enjoying now. And Thursdays, we have the gathering at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And so this is a group experience where we can take an even closer look at the topic for the week, how it shows up for our own personal lives, and the healing and transformative power of belonging and connection. And so Sunday, we have a stripped down Sunday experience at 12:30 Eastern, where we offer a streamlined approach to your Sunday experience through a mostly short and sweet approach to our weekly theme. And coming soon, our second Sunday experience will be on Sunday evening. So stay tuned for more information on that. And so to get more information about these events, stay up to date on new offerings, and get weekly inspirational emails and so much more, check out our website at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. And now, back to Truth Be Told.
What is the ultimate fear buster? Sit back, prepare yourself, because if you've heard a few of these videos, you've heard me talk about this before. I'm going to talk about love with a capital L, that one force of the universe, the life force. When people say God is love, this is what they mean. So love, it's bigger than that unconditional love that we have for a child. It's definitely bigger than romantic love. Those things are included in it, but it's different than that. It's a state of being. Like, love is not the right word, but it's the best word that I know of to kind of get us to that. And when we're in that state of it, of being, of experiencing that love, it is a state of ultimate embrace and acceptance of you exactly as you are, and you know and sense your place in it all, knowing that it is absolutely perfect, that there is nothing you could do that could ever put you outside of it. It's impossible. It's all that exists. And ultimately in the universe, it's the only thing that matters. Everything else that is seemingly outside of it is all designed to get us back to that. We live and are manifest in this physical world from that thing that I call love, God, Spirit, the infinite, the source, the force, whatever you want to call it, is manifesting us in this world in order for it to know itself fully. Like, how could it know that it is essentially it is eternal bliss? How could it know that that is what it is unless it got to experience what it isn't? And that's where we get this gift of living in the extremes, in this physical world of extreme love, extreme hate, the challenges, the sadnesses and fears, all that. And then on the opposite side, like that complete happiness and bliss. And through it all, as we talk about like being able to find joy even in the midst of sadness, that's all made possible by this thing called love. So it is our gift and tool to recognize that when we are in a state of fear, love is still there. It's always there. Mr. Rogers, he talked about his mom showed him this, and I forget the exact quote, but it's, when we see like extreme challenges or difficulties, situations, look for the helpers, because they're always there. And really what it all means is that when we look for love in the face of tragedy, in the face of upset, look for the love. It's there. And if you can't initially see it, be it. It's our time to draw from that within us. So no matter what's going on in life, at the end of the day, we all have to sleep. So if you're able to, lie your head down on a pillow, that's a blessing. Draw on that energy. Find it. Look for that love. Whether it's, conjuring up a song or a poem or a piece of art that gives you infinite inspiration, or a loved one, or somebody, an animal that you like to spend time with. Something that creates and that feeling within you that just points to that you are part of something bigger. That the more that we're able to do that, the more that you're able to contemplate that, go into meditation and let everything else fall away for a little while. It is for our health, it is for our immune system, it lifts us up. When we're in a state of fear, it's the opposite. It depletes our immune system, it causes fatigue and runs us down. And the way we show up in the world is two different people, depending on which side of that love or fear coin you are drawing from. So we're here to experience this world of extremes. We can't deny it or block it. It is our challenge to move through it, but it's love. It's that force underneath, that impetus that gives us the strength to do it. So love, capital L, the ultimate fear buster.
Like you said, love with a capital L, not a lowercase l, is the fear buster.
That's small time love.
That's small time.
Yeah. I feel like that's probably a song from way back.
Bill or Joel.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I like that idea. I think that, in any given situation, we are, acting from those spaces. Either we're acting from fear, or acting from love, or this sense of connection and balance and knowledge of who we are, or we're coming from maybe a fearful state where we may are coming from a story that we have created or some other sort of projection of past things or default ways. And so, yeah, I think that I like how you put it, because it is that thing that's always present and it's within us. It's not something we have to get and search for in order to put into place, but it's there. We have it within us to live from that space. That space of love, that space of knowing, that space of connection. When I think of love, I think of connection. So we have that, ability to move from a space of connection or from a space of disconnection. And sometimes when we're in fear, we do feel disconnected. We feel disconnected with ourselves, our thoughts, disconnected with the truth. And so I think, I liked how you kind of put those two sort of frameworks that we can operate from.
Kind of an aha moment going on here. And it's not really a new concept, but just coming together in a whole new way. Because there's been something weird around this topic of fear. Like, it's not even something that I think we've talked about much. So it's like, oh, we're pulling the words, the languaging together, right? Mm-hmm. And what just struck me as really vitally important about this conversation is something that you were just touching on, is this idea of recognizing the fear or identifying as the fear. And if we are identifying our experience as that fear-based, like if we are in and of that fear-based way of being, then that's what we're going to get. But if we are in this grounded, capital L love way of being, we still have the opportunity to recognize the thought of fear, the feeling of fear, recognize that fear comes up, but we don't have to identify with it.
Yeah.
Right. Which, and this is no different than anything else we've ever talked about, really, but it's just, it feels really specific right now to oh yeah, I think most of my life I have witnessed people identifying with fear. And And that's not something we necessarily have to do. Like there is a choice in there that once we recognize it, we don't have to identify with the fear, even if that's what the story has been.
Right.
Which feels really powerful.
Yeah.
Like one thing that just kind of just came to me, we've been talking so much about like fear and how it relates to the individual. We haven't talked a whole lot about how it relates to, like society at large. Seeing how like the effects that fear can have. I'm thinking about like the beginning of the pandemic when nobody could find toilet paper because this,
right.
The word got out that we're going to run out. It creates this fear, which then, creates this kind of greater, like it kind of snowballed. The next thing you know, everybody's running to the store to buy, 2 years worth of toilet paper because we're going to run out. And it just, leads me back to that collective idea. Was it FDR? Who was it that said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself? And what's your take on this, like collective level? Where does how does fear play in?
It's definitely contagious.
Yeah.
So just like, and this is a Brene Brown thing again too, is that fear and anxiety are contagious. They only exist in this kind of relationship with one another, relationship to the world, and so it becomes this contagious. Well, I think, just like love is contagious too. So it's like
the opposite.
So it's interesting. I think that just speaks to our connection and our creative power too. But it does become, I think, it becomes this sort of contagious sort of experience until we stop and say, wait a second, toilet paper. Okay, wait, maybe we don't need to go and get 2 years worth of toilet paper. But it's that stopping, kind of like the pause that we talked about a couple weeks ago. It's that stopping and like, wait a second, I'm operating on this silly story that I need like to fill my entire spare bedroom with toilet paper. And that is not the truth.
Yeah.
And when we recognize, oh, that's not the truth, then I cannot have to go and buy out every Harris Teeter aisle worth of toilet paper. So it's like, it's contagious, but then also I think that stopping can be contagious too.
Right.
I think that's where we have this kind of collective experience. I think we experience in one way and the other too.
Yeah. I think it also feels like it would be easier in a lot of ways. Like choosing fear, it's almost like, well, if we're fearful, we can find some place to place blame and not have to own our shit. We don't have to own our thing. Like we can just be fear and blame. Like, well, if we're afraid of, then there's something to blame. We can blame that thing we're afraid of, without having to really like own looking at that thing.
Yeah.
But then fear feels not good. It feels icky. So it was easier to make the choice, but the repercussions of it are not the best. Like we have to deal with that. So then we kind of get into the cycle where instead of dealing with the after effects of choosing fear, it's easier to just choose fear again.
Yeah.
And then again, just like, well, I don't want to deal with the repercussions of these after effects either. So again, and that, I really, like we said in the beginning, I think we do have this fear of being fearful. Like we're afraid of being fearful. We're taught not to be fearful. And so it develops this like, ooh, I'm not supposed to be fearful. And so we kind of pass it off as like, it's this weird thing, right? The way it does play out in the country, like if this group says one thing about this group and then this group does that thing, it's like, see, they did it out of fear. We told you they would. It's like, well, wait a minute, but maybe that's not why that happened, but it's an easier thing.
Well, and we create this culture of avoidance.
Yeah.
And I think we also create this culture in our spiritual communities. We call it spiritual bypass, but we do create this culture of avoidance. And because we don't want to look at the thing, we don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't want to sometimes experience the effect of our cause. And so we do create this culture of avoidance. And I think that what we're speaking of is this intentional turning towards those things that may be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it may be uncomfortable on the front end. It may take a lot of time to maybe deprogram some of these default things. But just think, when we do that, then it creates this really lightening of our experience moving forward. Like, you spend a lot of time on the front end, but it makes the whole other experience a lot easier. And I think that we have to adjust this culture of avoidance and really, like, a culture of leaning into this discomfort. And sometimes that's leading into fear, and sometimes that's being fearful and sitting in it and saying, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. Yeah. Now what do I do?
And what's interesting, like, even there, fear says don't lean into the discomfort.
Yeah.
So we even have fear over the, I mean, yeah, it's such a, it's so seeped into so much of like this fear avoidant culture is so based in a fearful mindset. One would almost have to just, I mean, you'd have to just spend so much time becoming so aware of how much fear actually plays into the decision making on the day to day, or even just culturally. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think, for us, it's really about going into that personal transformation around integrating the fear, and then learning how, as we do our individual work, then we take it into our communal evolution of handling fear.
Yeah.
I think that sums it up, Christopher.
We should make a motto or something.
Yeah, right. There should be a
communal evolution, and how do we take it out there?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like, how do you be the one to decide, oh yeah, I don't need to go buy a year's worth of toilet paper, and then not go do it, but then also recognize that that so many other people still think they need to buy a year's worth of toilet paper, and so have now bought out the shelves. Like, how do you decide to be the one not to do it, but also recognize, like, well, next time I go to buy toilet paper, there might not be any. I mean, it's just such an interesting, and I don't know the answer to that, but yeah.
There's a cameo.
Yep.
Griffin cameo.
Griffino.
Griffino.
I was looking to be like, what?
Huh? What? Awesome. All right. Cool. Well, Chris, if it's safe, you're on.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. As you can tell, we have absolutely the most amazing job. It is so much fun to explore these topics with you each and every week. It is our desire to not only share what we have learned, but to journey alongside with each one of you as we navigate this adventure we call life. Our mission at Soul Evolution Collaborative is to bring the wisdom of ancient teachings and spiritual principle in a new and innovative way. If you would like to support this mission and its continued evolution, we invite you to go to soulevolutioncollaborative.org and click on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible and serve to support this evolving ministry in its vision of personal transformation and communal evolution. I feel like we just heard that. Have a great week, everybody.